So I love giving talks, and here present something that has to do with a book. I cannot present the entire book in one talk, okay? But this book is a continuation of something that I was probably one of the few people who were really happy during the pandemic, okay? Because I have been writing a book for, I don't know, 12, 15 years, but it's hard to finish a book when you are dean. But given the fact that every weekend we were at home, I could finish the book. And in 2020, this book appeared. Let me just go back in here. This book, The Nexus. And as you can see, one chapter there is thinking at the nexus in a complex world. This is chapter 6. It's about complexity. And is augmented thinking for a complex world. This is an unusual book. A book has a title and a subtitle. It has an upper title and a subtitle. And in the book, in this chapter 6, I have this figure that the systems on the left are all systems that are designed with a blueprint. Okay? You don't improvise designing a nuclear submarine. You know exactly what each part will be. If parts fail, you better have a backup because the parts would not morph into fulfilling a function that was not designed. But the things on the right are completely different. You can study a fish to death and never understand how they form schools, or understand a neuron to death and you'll never understand consciousness. So these are my definitions of complicated and complex. And complicated and complex refer to problems, issues, but also could refer, with some slight modification, to a broad set of problems. And I was really happy when I discovered that this fellow Karl Popper, probably the most distinguished philosopher of science, talked about cloud problems and clock problems that go with complicated and complex, okay? Clock problems are problems that can be really hard to solve, like fusion or designing a really working quantum computing. But they are problems that essentially, with enough time, you may be able to solve. Clock problems are problems that are amorphous, changeable. They are problems that have a human component. For example, you cannot solve congestion in Chicago forever. Okay, so now, so Popper compared these two kinds of problems. The thing that I'm going to do here is give you a very big sort of, without going into every detail, because in the book, for each of the revolutions, I will have really lots of historical detail. I will talk about the world that we inherited, and I will be talking about Newton, and the influence of Newton in the world is probably much more than anybody here can imagine, except probably people from physics. The disruptions, then I will talk the awe-inspiring revolutions that follow the Newtonian revolution, and then I will kind of connect it more with today, so I have to say something about AI. Then I will talk about clock problems and cloud problems, and at the end, the talk will be more like a sort of more management kind of talk, because it will be about leadership, okay? So in the Newtonian world, cause and effect, completely linked. Every effect had a clear identifier. But the world now is a world of complex interconnectedness, feedback loops, networks, a whole bunch of things that make the things more harder to, in some sense, understand. And I put in there, the shift demands new cognitive frameworks that embrace complexity, uncertainty, and paradox as features rather than failures in our understanding. They are central problems. So those are things that define a cloud world. And why is or is because they are infinitely better connected in many respects compared with, I will make reference to 1800 and things like that. The speed at the propagation of information and a whole bunch of things make this a cloud world. Now, the main problem is when you have cloud problems, but you use clock thinking. And to a large extent, most of us still use clock thinking to address cloud problems, okay? The problems are cloud, but we think in terms of clock. Is our thinking prepared? My view is no. And why not? Because of the amazing staying power of the Newtonian worldview, okay? And I will try to demonstrate how amazing that was. And in fact, I love this quote: I can calculate the movement of stars, but not the madness of men. That was Isaac Newton, who was wiped out financially from the South Sea bubble. I mean, Newton did very well. He was the master of the mint, invested broadly, but for all his greatness, he was not good anticipating bubbles, okay? I will place the Newtonian revolution on a very broad canvas, okay? And you probably cannot see this. All of these things in here represent, well, let me just tell you. On the top, from left to right, there is science. I will blow this up. Then you have technology there, waves of innovation, and even management. Why management and consulting? Because for the ideas to flow at the level of being operationalized, the ideas have to flow from the top to the bottom and then from the bottom to organizations. So I will use that to kind of make concrete examples of the use of these ideas. And then I will have the time in which algorithms start revealing solutions in there and the advent of AI. And I will start there. That's when Newton's Principia appear, and I'm blowing this up. And by the way, in here, the calendars were different at that time, but the exact year that Galileo died, Newton was born, okay? But that's Newton's Principia Mathematica, 1687. But the idea of the search for laws predates Newton. And I'm going to say a few words about when Thomas Hobbes was the foremost philosopher in Europe, in England, decided to be the most natural philosopher in the world. That was Galileo Galilei. And Galileo Galilei, at the point of the visit from Hobbes, was under house arrest. He was not living in solitary confinement. He had an observatory. That's the house that he had. And Hobbes visited Galileo, and Hobbes was fascinated by Galileo's law of inertia, okay? Newton was lucky because Galileo was the one who had to battle Aristotelian ideas, okay? And the idea of Galileo was that an object in motion will continue to move unless interrupted by something else, or if it's at rest, it will continue. And so how is that Hobbes used this idea? He equated moving objects, forces, with the natural men. And what would men do, men in the sense of humankind, okay, do if there were no forces acting on it? And he concluded it will be a disaster. Human life will be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And so he tried to deduce, and he came up with two other laws, the best form of government. And he concluded that the best form of government was the Leviathan, who was like a king. Now, kings were not happy with Hobbes. That's why Hobbes had to leave Europe several times, because the power of kings was derived from God, not from some rational argument like Hobbes, okay? But the idea of laws comes from there. And then comes Principia. And Principia, as you know, there is not a single equation inside, okay? Not calculus. Calculus, Newton is one really piece of work. Leibniz, who was working at the same time on calculus, had 3 little articles on this. And it's pure geometry because Newton thought that the ideas will be more readily acceptable or accepted when you derive by geometrical arguments. That was what people were doing before. And Principia is amazing in the following sense. Newton did not contaminate Principia with ideas that actually occupied more time of his working hours than working on the things. He did not put alchemy. He did not put things like trying to deduce the age of the earth from looking at religious texts. All of that was out, okay? But very quickly, Newton acquired the status of a semi-god. You see there the portrait from William Blake, and that's a proposed epitaph never made it to where Mr. Abbott by Alexander Pope. And things were going really well, but there were things that Newtonian mechanics couldn't explain. One of them is this one, and happened like 60 years after Principia. Newton tried to calculate this and missed by a factor of 2 at least. And they were the upsides of the moon, the positions of the moon when he was the closest and the farthest to Earth. And this sort of have a cycle of about 7 years. People couldn't calculate this, and this fellow Claude Clariot somehow came up with the idea, maybe the 1r squared is not right. Maybe we put 1r cubed. People exploded. D'Alembert got into the picture. Euler got into the picture. And eventually, the one who solved this was Clariot. But for 60 years, the attitude was this. The calculations were really nasty calculations, expansions of all kinds. If there was a problem in between the math being right or the physics being right, they will bet on the physics. For 60 years, no question, Newton was right. That was it. But Newton was helped in his status, being like a demigod, by people like Laplace, Lagrange, and also by this fellow, Voltaire. Voltaire was a philosopher of some renown in France, not completely famous yet. At some point, he entered in some kind of battle with the royal family. He was thrown in the Bastille in prison. And believe it or not, he was there for 1 year. He negotiated that as a punishment, could they send him to England instead of being in the Bastille? And the French did that. It was enough of a punishment someone to be sent to England. And Voltaire went there, became fascinated by Newton, wrote several things about Newton. When he came back, his mistress was this very powerful woman, Madame de Châtelet, who was the one translating Principia in French. It's still the translation today. Added kinetic energy to Principia, didn't have it. And Voltaire worked really hard to destroy the reputation of Newton's arch rival, who was Leibniz. Okay? He even put Leibniz as a character, a simpleton, in one of his plays. So Newton was helped a lot by the French, in this case, Voltaire. Perfecting the picture, you have Lagrange, Laplace, the complete dominance of rational thinking. You know, the Lagrange statement that you shall find no pictures in this book because pictures were somehow crutches that you did not know if you were doing serious work. And the Newtonian influence was enormous, okay? Extended to religion, because if there is complete determinism, is there free will? And if there is complete determinism, what's the role of God in the world? So there were lots of battles there. Philosophy, economics, the Adam Smith concept of invisible hand was there. In government, the separation of powers, checks and balances, in all the Constitution of the US, all the founding fathers of the US were Newtonians. Jefferson even bought one of Newton's death masks, okay? And in organizations, hierarchical organization, change of command, standard, all of that is Newtonian, okay? And I will use that. And then after solving the upsides of the moon, at some point, one problem that became really hot was that gave rise to Neptune was they still couldn't solve the three-body problem. And the three-body problem was put as, there were 4 problems that were proposed to give a big prize from the King of Sweden. And number 1 in those problems was, they did not know that the three-body problem was impossible, okay? They put as a first problem the n-body problem. There were only 4 entries for that solution. And the entry that won was Poincaré, as we will see, okay? Why this? Why this? Because Uranus was not behaving exactly as predicted by Newtonian mechanics. It was a fraction of a degree of the position that should be. And there were lots of explanation theories that were advanced in explaining this disturbance. Eventually, the one that won, there were lots of people involved. Bessel, one of the Bessel functions, had one idea. Eventually, the idea that won was that there had to be an unknown planet that was producing these disturbances. And 2 people, John Couch Adams and Jean Le Verrier, Adams in England and Le Verrier in France, back calculated the position of this planet. And the one who announced the findings first to Berlin, to an observatory, was Le Verrier. And within an hour, they found the planet within a fraction of a degree where it's supposed to be. So after this, people could do no wrong. And that's why they put this problem, the n-body problem, as being solvable. And the one who won that was Poincaré. I mean, there's a whole book and a story, this a book by a woman named Jim Barrow Green about this. Poincaré announced a solution. A postdoc discovered that he was not right. He had to buy all the printed issues of the Acta Mathematica, okay, correct the solution, and basically show that there could be no analytical solution because of chaos. The finding produced no splash whatsoever. All what they probably took was that you couldn't find an analytical solution, okay? Until that point, this is 1897, the belief on precision was everywhere. The fellow, Albert Michelson, the first Nobel Prize of Physics, 1907, he was a professor in the Naval Academy and a graduate of the Naval Academy, did this experiment in what is now Case Western University about speed of light, basically demonstrating that there was no ether. And he basically expressed the sentiment that precision was going to be needed to advance knowledge in the future. And in there I quote something that fellow Michelson took notes, that discoveries due to the increasing order of accuracy will be made possible, improvements in measuring instruments, okay? And he wrote about this, gave examples of this, for example, the discovery of Lord Rayleigh's discovery of, I think what was this? Argon, I think. And one of the examples that he gave, not knowing that the example is what will put him out of business, really, was the example of the irregularities of Neptune. Okay? And this was 1907. Well, the 1907 was the Nobel Prize, and this was the statements were 1903. okay, by 1905, all the bets were off, but still, by that time, precision. So he put this one, and this is what Poincaré discovered, okay? So, and this was 1889, but still had not diffused at all. In fact, when Poincaré died, there were glowing obituaries, 2.5 pages in Nature. This was mentioned in passing, with the words, in the fact that did not succeed in. That was what appeared in there. So the going forward structure of this book is, I will put Principia there, they will put the awe-inspiring revolutions and the lessons. Now, there is one revolution that appeared independently of the Newtonian one, and these people should deserve more credit because this was the first time that there was emphasis on precision, accuracy. In fact, the law of conservation of mass comes from the chemistry side of things. And they deserve a little bit more credit because whereas no one was doing at home experiments like throwing balls from inclined planes, everybody thought that they knew some chemistry because after all, they were producing alloys, textiles, and a whole bunch of things. But this was the relationships in between components matter more than the components themselves. That's how basically what the essence of chemistry. But then you have the chapters that I will have are all of those. Thermo and statistical mechanics, relativity. I'm not the first to put this together. In fact, Alfred Whitehead in 1925, the ink was not yet dry in quantum mechanics, and he wrote a book, which is A Science and the Modern World, in which you see chapter 8 is the quantum theory. And obviously, he didn't hit all the other ones, but he had evolution in there. He got into religion and science. And so these are the amazing. I try to condense this, after much thinking, into a couple of sentences. For example, the discrete nature of nature, the DNA of revolution, is the amazing power of a 4-letter code. Okay? In the power of the many, I call statistical mechanics because remarkably to solve many, the genius of this was Maxwell, who, by the way, the year that Maxwell died, Einstein was born. It's another of those coincidences. They putting probability at the center of physics. It was there, and more at the center it was with quantum. So those are the lessons. And for example, for the last one, the dawn of the discrete, basically what we are living in now, all computation, all of those things, is formalize the concept of algorithm as a process that can be established or analyzed independent of the physical implementation. I mean, that's basic. So for all of those, there was some route leading to that little statement, and I have them there. And I have them in blue there because all of those in blue are corrected emerge from challenge to Newtonian foundations. Not ordered chronologically, it's game theory that I have it there. Game theory didn't appear as trying to fight any established order, just appear out of the blue. John Boyd Neumann, 1940, appeared. But I have them there because all of those below originated outside physics. And I have game theory there in the middle because looking up sees math, but looking down sees people and biology. And there's lots of biology and evolution in computation. That's why it's in there, okay? Now, there are lots of names will appear in there, some of them multiple times. I put a few here. Von Neumann appeared lots and lots of times. Then there are people who appear as connectors. Benny Ferg Somerville, who wrote the biggest bestseller in physics, really, but this was before Maxwell, okay? It was the biggest bestseller book until Darwin's The Origin of Species. She connected a lot of these people, and in fact, she was the mentor of Ada Lovelace. and connected Lovelace with Babbage, was arguably the first computer in the world. Okay? But one thing that I was amazed, all of these people are connected. All the people above game theory talk to each other. Darwin didn't talk with anybody above. Didn't have any correspondence. He had 15,000 letters, but none with people from physics. But remarkably, Boltzmann was an admirer of Darwin. In fact, he said, if you ask me for my innermost conviction as how the next century will be known for, I answer without qualms that it will be named the century of the mechanical view of nature of Darwin. In his collected works, talks, the name of Darwin appeared 19 times. So this is the amazing reach of this Newtonian view, okay? And in organizations, I mentioned, produce the structure of organizations as we know now, performance, driven metrics, everything, management by objectives, all of those things you can trace directly to Newtonian. But how will the post-Newtonian view affect this? And if you are putting all of these things together, as I said there, with those sort of PT lessons, and you try to encapsulate them in one or two sentences, not to replace the Newtonian viewpoint, it's still pretty useful, but to augment it, what is that you will come up with? Try to put that, and you can come up with something that reads like this. The organization of the future is one that embraces uncertainty at the micro level while maintaining a strategic direction at the macro level, one that accepts, synthesizes, and draws values from contradictory viewpoints, derives benefits from multiple perspectives. I mean, each of those things come from one of those revolutions, okay? And has the ability to evolve ideas, another one, and creates conditions for emerging creativity and innovation. You can add more things in there, and you will come up with, for example, more with, this is more aligned with bio. If you put bio, you heavy put system biology or synthetic biology, you will come up with something like the organization of tomorrow functions as a biological rather than engineered systems, modular, resilient, and interconnected. Okay? So, but revolutions need tools to succeed. And this is a chronological order of tools. Obviously, the main tool for developing ideas in Newtonian mechanics was calculus, but that's not how it penetrated organizations and companies and this and that. In 1940, 1970, with the words operation research comes in full force, that's Newtonian thinking to the max, okay? And now you have the algorithmic turn of machine learning, big data, AI. And what changes are brought by AI, the AI revolution? Now, AI, I have to be careful, okay? There are two kinds of AIs. The AI that exists in 1960, 70, still now, try to answer the questions how humans thought, okay? The symbolic inspired AI, the one now, is what works, really. And that's why people who are doing the old AI hate the new AI because they think it's crude, but it works, okay? So AI could be a Newtonian tool or a post-Newtonian tool, okay? AI each between domains, connecting domains. I have given talks about this. Creativity emerging from cross-domain synergies. AI could be a translator on those. And I will say a couple of words about creativity and AI very, very quickly. So AI can mine everything that is up to now, all of it. Can answer questions. Can you explain this to me? Maybe can come up with it. Can connect to things. You can say, can you connect this and that? Tell me in what ways you can do it. Maybe there is a concept that the concept could lead to new ideas. Maybe you can say, find every pattern written by people in Northwestern of teams of more than 3, how many women, men. You can do lots of things, mining things. You can fill holes. Some holes are easy to fill, some not. There are lots of still conjectures that the Clay Mathematical Institute will give you $1 million if you prove those. Still they remain to be filled. And some of these ideas appear in the domain. They can be breakthroughs. By breakthrough, I mean something that enlarges the domain. Maybe breakthrough maybe kind of pierces the domain, and eventually you can make the domain larger, okay? But all the ideas stay within the domain because they are all parts of things that they were in the domain already. So, but a break with is something that breaks with the assumptions in the previous domain. All these revolutions that we talk about, they were all breakways, okay? Energy not being continuous, space and time being connected, probability being at the center of physics, for example. That there were ideas that you needed to explain irreversibility and a whole bunch of things, but those were different category. And the question is, what does it take to produce a breakaway? So one example that I like to use is Flatlanders. It's a book by this fellow Abbott. Flatlanders given a world that is two-dimensional, they cannot imagine a sphere. When a sphere visits them, they see a point and a circle that grows. The whole point is that a system cannot transcend, cannot generate its own transcendence. You are trapped in there into this. So in the same way that you can have lots of examples in here, you can feed all Western art prior to 1900 to AI, if AI existed in 1900, and ask, tell me how art will evolve, visual art, and you'll never come up with abstract expressionism or cubism or things like that. Or if we are more literary, you'll never come up with James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, or Proust, okay? Because it was not embedded in the previous data. So every piece of training data contains implicit assumptions that you have to abandon. So now in 1968, I think the IBM 360 was barely there, I think, okay? Picasso said this, which I think still is current. Computers are useless. They can only give you answers. So my view is that if you really want to make progress in any field, you have to come up with an ability to ask questions. And that's really not easy, okay? So let me give you one example. Many people will know everything that is in this slide. You have tensegrity there, which, by the way, have been since 1920. There is at the lower left, this sculpture in Labia who did a whole exhibit with sculptures that were tensegrity. And origami have been with us for, give or take, I don't know, 500 years. And at some point, origami became, or was put in more mathematical terms. And then one thing led to another one. We have origami engineering. And applications, origami and tensegrity are coming together, and you have applications for robotics, material science, a whole bunch of things. The question is, what kind of questions could possibly lead to this being the answer? The question cannot be, oh, tell me if there are mathematical consequences of origami. If you're asking that question, you already figured it out that there got to be something, okay? So asking questions is essential. So I think that in the future, there has to be a new essential skill, crafting questions that unlock creative potential, and even what I would call assumption archaeology, okay? Identifying buried assumptions that limit thinking, that they're there, but they're so embedded in us that we don't recognize them as assumptions, okay? So a human creativity in the age of AI is the capacity to benefit from what I would call productive confusion, the ability to be puzzled by what everybody else takes for granted. If you start thinking about all of those revolutions, ask a question that everybody thought was not a question. It was because it was there. So, but we need to put things in perspective. AI is great, can do many things, but let me just rescale perspective. And tell you again the amazing consequences of the Newtonian world. These consequences with enlightenment, the Enlightenment created the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution created amazing wealth, okay? And during the Industrial Revolution, and prior to that, was the first time that people who knew things, savants, in the vocabulary of Joel Mokyr, our colleague who won the Nobel Prize this year in economics, connected with fabricants, the people who knew how to make things. So you have Priestley connected with Wedgwood, who did porcelains, for example. And knowledge and organizations become engines of growth, okay? If you use discovery, invention, and enterprise. If you want to know the impact of this, that book, The Culture of Growth by Joel Mokyr, is a perfect book to read. That's the GDP per capita. Don't ask me how on earth people know what the GDP was in the year 1000, okay? But some economists have figured this out, and look at that one ends in 2000, this is 2024. This is, AI will have a long distance to go to match this, okay? So I mentioned a consequence of these revolutions on organizations, and I put there some of the characteristics of organizations, but every revolution goes too far, okay? You can put all of these revolutions, like Soviet central planning, was complete disaster. All of these deserve a book, okay? The 737 MAX of Boeing, all of those were consequences of Newtonian thinking taken to an extreme. The blind spots was that they miss all of these. Nonlinearity, sensitivity to initial conditions, loops, and treating uncertainty as ignorance rather than information, okay? So how do we get here? Because at some point, you have one theory that was so dominant that no other theory could compete for a space. And what are the consequences of that? The consequence of that is that you create group thinking. For example, this happened with one of the 2008 financial crisis. The IMF produced a report that accused themselves of these bright economists of group thinking. They couldn't see the outside. So multiplicity of views is the same. So another big issue is this. At some point, algorithms reveal solutions, okay? And there you have AI, okay? Lots of things happen in there in between. Lots of things from the point of view of technology. Why those things happen? Because science was giving you the ability to predict things. You could design things, you could build things, okay? And amazing technologies were created in this space, to the point that some people marvel about the amazing power of physics and math in the world. This quote from Eugene Wigner, who wrote this paper about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in natural sciences. So understanding doesn't lead to prediction. You can understand something without being able to predict it. But now we're in a case in which we could predict without understanding. Okay? So we are, this is probably the most important slide I'm showing. The Newtonian world on the left, the post-Newtonian on the right, okay? Determinism to emergence, linear causality to complex feedback systems, those kinds of things. I mean, it's not as clear as I'm just making it here, but what is needed is a new way of seeing and acting now embraces the cloud, the complexity of the cloud, okay? A way that teaches us to design for adaptability, nurture resilience, and see uncertainty as a source of creativity. I'm talking about almost every organization, including the university, for example. We have some of those things that we need to use. And these are some of the things that go in the basket of complexity. It's hard to capture all of it. I put some of them. But those things capture the tools and even the vocabulary, but not the mindset. just because you took a course on that, it's not that your mind will be adopted to think in that way when you face a problem in the future. In fact, my perception is no. So the organization of the future has to be one that, there are verbs in there, embraces aids strength from contradiction and multiple perspectives. That's it, that's one. Evolves ideas rather than defends them. Creates conditions for emerging creativity, innovation. All of these things, all of these verbs are part of the mindset. And this is what people would spend 2 years, not that this is being taught now in MBA classes, but this is what you spend years trying to have your brain adapted to think in conditions that sort of broaden your horizon to understand the business side of things. So I put some of these things in that book. And how do you call this new thing? Maybe it's cloud thinking, maybe Nexus thinking. Nexus was about the confluence of different types of thinking. And the next revolution has to be cognitive. Okay? We have tools, but our mind has not really adapted to the world as is now. So what if you are trying to teach this, what would you do? Now, I'm going to create this mindset is not simple, requires imagining how we educate leaders, design organizations. We still reward prediction, optimization, and control, the tools of the clockwork age. Yet what the future demands is something different, the capacity to work with uncertainty, to design for adaptability, to foster resilience, and so on. So this gets into the issue of leadership, and I'm not going to go into this except to tell you I have thought about this with colleagues, and we tell you what the components would be if you are. I was trying to train all of you into this mode of thinking. There are lessons that you can draw. For example, the top one in there, boundary domain fluidity, okay? A whole bunch of things. The ability to create even compelling narratives, okay? So for the last 3 centuries, we live in a clockwork world, one that was built on prediction, precision, and control. Amazing things happen as a consequence of this. You saw the GDP, Industrial Revolution, change the world completely, okay? Today we inhabit a different kind of world, one that is networks, interdependence, and emergence. Most of what matters, economies, organizations, societies, behaves like a cloud, adaptive, evolving, and alive, okay? So you have to go back in there, the lessons. Relativity killed the absolute. Quantum mechanics put probability and duality at the center. Evolution showed that imperfection drives progress, that you can design things without a designer. Code and computation reveal that simple rules can create endless complexity, okay? So AI extends that story, astonishing its reach, yet bound by its frame. The frame is what is out there, okay? It can respond, but it cannot yet break with the past. That still belongs to human curiosity and those who ask questions that reframe what's possible. In a sea of sameness, by that I mean you are seeing videos produced now with AI, they all look the same, really, okay? In a sea of sameness, imagination is more important than ever. I'm an optimist on this, okay? I see the role for humans. So the organization of the future is one that will embrace uncertainty at the micro level. And basically this is, we must stop thinking like clockmakers, perfecting mechanisms, just putting things in order and work at the edges, and learn how to think like cloud watchers. This is the art and the promise of thinking in a complex world, or thinking in the cloud. Okay, thank you.